How can Indian brands go global? That's the discussion today, and joining me is an extremely interesting panel, a bunch of CMOs who are successful in their own right for taking their brands where they are today in the country, and of course also Interbrand's Chief Marketing Officer, who's going to tell us where India stands today, how we can improve our innings, and when Indian brands will finally make the cut on the global stage. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen. So Graham, first to you. You know, this particular theme, we've been discussing it for now donkey's years, how Indian brands will go global. And the fact is, you know, Interbrand comes up with its global brands year on year. So,
sure.
So, you know, I know it's not out for 14, but if you look at 2013, we didn't have a single brand, Indian brand, that actually made it to that list.
Yes.
And it's very unlikely that in 2014 we'll actually make the cut. Your reaction to that? Do you think it's possible this year?
Indian's got some very sizable businesses. It's made some very astute acquisitions, and it's got some very good business people. So it will come, but the way that Indian businesses have managed their brands doesn't necessarily enable them to become global brands quickly enough. And the clue's really in the title. It's about best global brands. So it's about brands that span geographies across the whole world. And Indian businesses have tended not to use their brands to go into other geographies, even when they've been making those acquisitions.
So let me take it to you, Sandeep. You know, so Indians and India per se is well known for several things globally. We're known for chicken tikka, we're known for our yoga, we're known for Bollywood. You know, we're known for all these things. So that itself is we're known for generics. But we're not known for anything in particular as a standout brand. If you ask anybody, name me, an Indian brand, it'll take some time. There's no brand that just pops up. You obviously work for a global company. So from where you stand, what do you think the problem is? Is it the fact that, you know, we're not as aspirational in the way we conduct businesses to really see ourselves as a world power? Are we still suffering from the colonial hangover?
My feeling is that it's just a matter of time, right? So the first thing you need to have a global brand is global reach.
Sure.
And you can see that increasingly some really innovative Indian companies, and we have folks from some of the companies here, like Tata is a well-known brand, right? Mahindra is a well-known brand. So I was in rural US with my brother on a holiday, and I saw a Mahindra tractor, and I walked up to this guy, and he did actually own a Mahindra tractor there, right? So the first thing you need to have a global brand is to get people using your products across the globe. I think that's the first step. And we haven't necessarily been doing that, to your point, in terms of exporting some of the best things we do. We have had a strong services industry, but essentially a lot of the top brands will have to make stuff, and that's happening now. And I'm not sure whether we'll have one this year, but I definitely see that happening in maybe 2 to 3 years' time from now.
Right. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement to say that in 2 to 3 years, you know, an Indian brand will make it to the global brand list. But Venkat, specifically to you, you know, Titan actually did manage to go and make some kind of movement in global markets, yet it's not really capitalized, so to speak, and, you know, become a brand by itself globally. So to you in particular, let's talk about Tanishq. And let's talk about stuff that one can actually make a niche for in the global, globally. Do you think it's that we're so content with, you know, how much we're doing within India, and the fact that, you know, yeah, sure, we do a little bit, we dabble here and there, that the appetite to actually see yourself as, you know, a powerful brand globally is not there?
One important reason why a brand becomes global is a lot of people discover that brand in many markets outside. If I take the most recent entry of a global brand into India, which is Starbucks, over the last 15 years, hundreds of thousands of Indians have traveled to the US and actually experienced Starbucks. They've developed a certain desire for Starbucks. So the latent demand for Starbucks in India has been built by hundreds of thousands of people discovering it in the US.
Right.
And therefore, when Starbucks comes into India, it's already a brand waiting to be successful.
Sure.
Right. Now, I think that's a very important aspect of globalization of brands.
Okay.
As more and more foreigners come into India, which is very, India's share of total flow of people across the globe is very, very small. So when a lot of Indians come into India, for example, and when they discover an Indian brand, let's say Tanishq, they step into a jewelry store in Bombay or Delhi and discover the exotic Indian jewelry, let's say over the next 10 years, then to take Tanishq to the US as a brand that they have discovered in India is rather easier than taking Tanishq or any brand out of the blue into a foreign market where there is, you build it through advertising and marketing. It's a very long haul kind of.
I agree. This is the quintessential argument anybody would give for an Indian brand not going global in the true sense of the term global, where everybody has heard of the brand, right? So this is the regular argument. The question is, do we seem to lack the attitude and vision? And really, Graham, if you can come in and be as candid as you can, do you think Indian companies per se lack the vision and the attitude, because they have the skills for sure?
India is a very unique market, and I think one of the things which is interesting about India's history is that because it had a closed border for so long, and because the market is so vast already, the domestic market of India has been huge. And it's been a huge market that's enabled businesses to be big and brands to be big within India. There's also an interesting aspect attached to India that means that brands become experts in a market that just doesn't really exist anywhere else. So if we look at brands and as they move across international borders, you're looking for commonalities, you're looking for similar markets that these brands can be aimed at. And one of the fascinating things about India is it is just so idiosyncratic that you can't begin to pretend that there's another market that is just like India elsewhere. That's why I think it's really a case of yet. And I think the estimate of 2-3 years is probably about right. We can see we've got sizable brands in the best Indian brands table today. Some of those brands are big enough to actually enter into best global brands on a value basis, but not yet on a globality basis. Sure. And that's the interesting crux of the matter.
Everything that you just said talked about how we're so different, we're so unique that, for the rest of the world to actually relate to us is a bit difficult. If that is actually the case, how does one ever break this barrier? Because we're not changing in a hurry.
If you start to find that you've got competitor ABC coming in that is a global brand and competing within your own market, what used to be your benchmarks of being good enough to delight your customers yesterday is no longer good enough to delight your customers tomorrow. So the world is becoming a much more difficult place for brands to compete against one another. And this will create a sort of hurry up signal for Indian businesses where the general standards required and what it takes to delight a customer and succeed within a market which is growing very quickly, the level of aspiration is just going to increase. And that will create stronger brands and more competitive brands.
Right. He's brought up a good point, given the fact that, we were closed for so long and we opened up, and the fact that, we're such a large country that, our domestic consumption, our captive economy is so large that, serving that itself is a huge opportunity. So that can be a boon and a bane. A boon because, we have our own market, but the bane comes because sometimes we get a little bit complacent because we have just so much market to cover yet at home before we, go outside. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so any brand that needs to be a global brand also needs to be locally relevant in the markets that they are in, right? So and that's where the challenge comes. If you're a little bit too inward looking, I don't think you have the ability to then adapt to a new market that you go in, because a lot of the stuff that made you successful here might not be transplantable in those markets. So I think the two things that are really, really important for any brand, this is what we have learned to be successful globally, is number one, you need to have a simple, clear story that you can tell across markets. What do you stand for? And I sometimes feel that many of our Indian brands did not have the opportunity to think hard about that problem from a global perspective.
Sure.
Because to the point that you and Graham made, you had our internal problems, we were so focused here, you don't think about what's the simple story that I have to tell the world. And the second thing is, as you tell that story, you also need to make sure that you are locally relevant.
The other point that I would bring here, see, this conversation is about brands, but organizations can be global without necessarily taking their brands out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I take our own example of the Tata Group,
Yep.
The Jaguar Land Rover acquisition is a huge vehicle through which the group has gone global. Therefore, the ownership of other global brands is an equally important way of capitalizing on the opportunity of the global market, as opposed to simply in a way, insisting on taking our brands abroad. If you take not just India, if you take the entire east of the world, right? Which are the global brands of the last 25 years in the east of the world? If you take Samsung, it's probably the most shining example of a country which was really backward, but it's now really shining.
Sure.
Right. But barring that, the number of Eastern brands which have gone global, you can probably count. But the number of Eastern organizations which have gone global, including a group like Mahindra.
Yeah.
So buying brands to become global versus necessarily taking, because it's not finally a matter of country loyalty. It's a matter of also business strategy and purpose.
Absolutely.
What makes sense?
Absolutely.
If I take the largest jewelry brand in the world, is a domestic brand of China. Chow Tai Fook is operating only in 95% of its sales is from China. 5% is outside. Now they have recently bought Hearts of Fire, which is a very, very famous American jewelry brand, to in a way go global. Whereas imagine Chow Tai Fook putting up a store in Chicago. Nobody would even recognize it.
In fact, I can add 2 points to what you very rightly described. There are many companies which may be in world's top 10, but they are not global. Take, for example, Verizon in US. Is the largest operator in US. But nobody will say Verizon is a global brand because they chose to be largely a domestic operator.
Fair enough.
So it is in many ways connected with how you choose to do your business. Second, if you see the origin of business in different countries, it has followed different path. In the economies which were smaller, very often, and especially which were controlled, very often promoters had to go into several businesses which were not necessarily connected. So it had the formation of large groups in those countries which operated under one name, but they may operate in diverse products. Countries where there was one single product company operating in large market, and good examples will be Coca-Cola or Pepsi, one product company, they have other products, but largely, and entire focus on that going worldwide is very different from the way brands originated in today's emerging economies. The challenge before the Indian brands is, how do you synergize the brand sheen which is coming from operating in different industries and still bring it all together so that there is a combined synergistic impact in customers' mind that this is what, for example, Mahindra stands for.
Ram, just to take off from what both these gentlemen said, and what Venkat said, that it's not essential for brands to go global, but they can buy out other companies, and organizations can become global. My question is, isn't there a more inherent problem that Indian and possibly even Chinese companies face, which is the perception issue, which is, what does made in India stand for? What does made in China stand for? It stands for, if I had to be realistic, it stands for poor quality, it stands for cheap, right? And the fact is, if an Indian organization acquires, a global brand or a brand, let's say, for instance, let's take the SsangYong example, right? If they rename it, rechristen it, it's going to backfire because then you're telling people it's an Indian brand, which is what you don't want to do. You don't want to bring it to their attention that it's Indian. So we suffer from a very, very inherent issue, which is our perception needs to change.
Well, I think that's an interesting question. So, really, if we look at the Korean businesses again, that went through a similar degree of prejudice about what did Korea actually mean, and deliberately set about changing that prejudice about their businesses. So Hyundai famously came up with a 70-year warranty because they knew that people were concerned about the quality of their vehicles and the longevity attached to their vehicles. So answer that with a very bold claim of, we've got a 7-year warranty attached to our vehicles. And it's those sort of tactics and techniques that I think Indian businesses need to learn from. If you take an organisation like Samsung, which is highly diversified, what they did is they spotted which categories have got the highest role of brand. So the brand has the greatest role to play. So by specialising in those categories, they took an awful lot of the components that they produce into flat screen TVs and mobile handsets, which got a high role of brand, so that the brand itself becomes famous and then it becomes an asset for the entire group. And they did that in a very premeditated and very deliberate way about understanding how to build their brand as an asset. Also coming from an emerging nation, they understood that in fact they had to give it that global push because they're going to run out of space very quickly within the Korean market. So they've shown that this diversification is possible through a central brand theme, but it requires determination and it requires a really robust methodology attached to it. No coincidence that Samsung sits there with a vision of what they want their brand to be worth in the year 2020 and the fact that they want to be a top 5 best global brand by the year 2020. So yeah, it's a very deliberate process that they've set about to build their brand value and receive the benefits that their business has from that.
Just like Braham talked about, Samsung and how they strategically, have gone about, regrouping their products and businesses according to what gave them highest brand recall. So it's a long journey, right? And they also have their vision for 2020. Do you think the problem with Indian organizations is the fact is that the vision horizon is a 10-year horizon, it's not a 100-year horizon. So that whole brand value creation somewhere is shortchanged.
Certainly. I think it is also, in a way, the root cause will be, I think, the confidence of the nation.
Absolutely.
No, it's very much, but it's certainly, dramatically changing.
Yeah.
We actually launched Tanishq in the US 6-7 years back. It was a very bold move. It was not at all targeting the NRI. It was targeting the mainstream fashion-conscious American woman with the brand name Tanishq.
Right.
Okay. And the stores were exceptionally beautiful. The products were really, off the charts. The feedback from the industry was very, very positive. But in 2008, the global meltdown hit. And, we chose the wrong time without knowing to enter. Therefore, we sort of folded up after some time and came back. But we also realized that to actually establish Tanishq in the US is going to take a long, long haul, as opposed to buy a brand of jewelry in the US and run it more efficiently, which we could. So, therefore, is it patriotism or is it business? If it is patriotism, then we struggle with our brand despite the fact that other alternatives are available. Yeah. Or we buy a brand, own it and make it work.
Mr. Shukla, I want you to talk about two things. One is the fact that, the Indian perception problem that we all face. The fact that you are Indian, you must be of this quality. And secondly, I want you to just throw some light on what you think is this because of our own confidence levels, which of course, like he's rightly pointed out, is improving. But the fact is, we're still subservient. We still seem to have lower self-esteem compared to, let's say, our counterparts within the continent.
No, I don't agree. One good thing we have about India is that before manufacturing, in our case, service sector went out. As a result, we made a beginning largely with IT sector. And people acknowledge worldwide that IT sector has done well for India and Indians have done well for IT sector. That is the advantage neither Japanese had, nor Koreans had, nor Chinese had. So they began with manufactured products and therefore they began with poor quality impression. India has begun with what is known as unknown factor. They said, yeah, Indians are good in IT. Are they also good in cars? Now, it's a very different statement than the statement made 20 years ago about another country. Can they make cars? Here, that is a very different situation.
I don't think, with all due respect, I don't think people will make a jump from they make good software, so I'm going to buy their car, right?
Not like that, but they don't make bad cars.
Yeah, so you will have to go through pretty much the same process that all of them went, unless you come out with quality products which people can trust, and unless you invest in building your brand, it's not going to work.
So the distinction is, are people in the US thinking Indian makes poor products, as opposed to China makes poor products?
And I think the first question that we need to ask is that how many Indians actually aspire to kind of build, buy or own our brands, right? So I think we need to kind of start there, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Once we are, but because if you look at some of the global champions we talked about, I know some Korean friends, even before Samsung became big in mobiles, they would only buy a Samsung phone because they knew that it would be the best because it was made there.
Yep.
I think you have to have that quality. You have to first win the love and respect of your own countrymen before you think about it.
Yeah, we've seen India create a very successful brand within the tourism market about Incredible India. And the fact that you do have people coming to India and having enriching experiences does mean that at least you've got a transient group of consumers who are coming backwards and forwards to India and having experiences that they take away from it, which are not necessarily back to that value-based made in India. There's an enriching experience that India offers.
But the only challenge which is still remaining on that point, Graham, is that the number of people who will go to Champs-Élysées and look at the LV store and the huge queue which is standing in front of the LV store, coming back wanting that LV bag someday on her wrist, versus the number of, I'm talking about Indians, Chinese, Dutch, Americans, Australians, Brazilians going to Champs-Élysées and observing the LV store, as opposed to the number of various nationalities coming into Mumbai and observing an Indian brand like that. That aspect is also a driver of brand.
Brands don't have to be premium, but they've got to have a value that their consumers understand, and that value's got to be more than it costs you to make it. Otherwise, you don't have a business at the end of the day. IKEA, I think, great example.
Correct.
There's a fair price there where they have got a premium. It's a premium. It's not an exorbitant premium, but it's something where the deal feels right on both sides of that equation.
If there was one thing that you thought was most critical for Indian companies to fix, just one thing, what would it be?
I think we could be better storytellers, right? So in the end, just to extend on what you said, right? So if you have to create a global brand, you have to create a global story. So we could be better at creating a global story of what our brands stand for.
Fair enough. Your perspective on one thing?
To me, ambition. Ambition to be global.
Sure.
I think is the single biggest thing that I think we need more of.
We need to increase our appetite.
So first you have to have products which will cater to the needs of different markets which you are going to serve. If the products you are using to serve Indian market does not match the needs of people in other countries, the customers in other countries, you cannot build a business and then you cannot build a brand.
I'm winding this down, but we're celebrating our 67th year of independence. Do you think India is behind the curve if you objectively look at it in terms of where it should have been and where it is today on the global stage?
With hindsight, India could have played its cards differently and it would have had more valuable brands.
Sure.
I think it's a fast accelerator now, and certainly I agree that 2 to 3 years' time, I think there'll be an Indian brand on the best.
I like the way you always soften the blow, but there.
So Graham was being very diplomatic there. Right. I think we have missed a lot of opportunities. We are definitely behind, but that should just spur us to do quicker, faster, and be more ambitious. So definitely.
I agree with your statement. In 67 years, we could have done much more. But you should remember that till recently, 99, 2000, 2001, to go outside India for foreign travel, you had to apply to Reserve Bank of India to get $250. You can't build brands with that. So
you can only buy a brand with that.
We have to keep these realities in mind, that till 15 years ago, it was a hassle to get foreign exchange to go out of India on a trip. Against that background, you have to see what Indian brands have achieved.
Yeah, I come from a nation that has theoretically built lots of valuable brands over the years, but has sold all of them. So at least India is sitting there with an acquisition mindset and seizing the opportunities that it finds, which is why I would regard it as being a fast accelerator.
Fair enough, fair enough. On that note, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time, and this has been really invigorating. Some really candid statements and thoughts coming up, and in 2 to 3 years, as a gentleman here we believe that Indian brands will make it to the top 100 brands of the Interbrand list.
As long as they manage themselves well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.